Thanks, everyone. No politics for me today. Okay. All right. So the genesis of this project is basically an understanding that measuring physical activity is difficult to do. There's good reason to be very critical of self-reports of physical activity. They typically have low to moderate correlations with actually measured physical activity. You get larger biases when you ask about longer term recall. You get biases when you ask about the type of physical activity or the intensity of the physical activity. And these can be exacerbated by sociodemographic factors. So for all these reasons, many studies implement wearables now, such as Fitbits or other activity trackers. So these are an improvement over self-reports. You can actually track people's, heart rate, their actual steps, their distance, and so on. But these still have downsides for implementation in a large panel. And the UAS, if you were here at the data workshop earlier, it now has, over 14,000 participants. So one of the issues is it's just very expensive to go ahead and give all of those people Fitbits and pay for the data. The other is that there's still a selection issue with wearables. So there are still some people that don't wear it, and some people that will forget to wear it. And so you still have these issues even with wearables in terms of accurate measurements. So what to do? Well, we're not going to abandon self-reports, and we want to come up with a good measure of physical activity for the UAS panel. So what we decided to do here is design the UAS physical activity experiment. And the basic idea was to see which measure of self-reported physical activity sort of best correlates with data we have from wearables. So we took and modified 3 measures of self-reported activity. One is a modified version of the Stanford Activity Survey. We have the active or sedentary survey, which was taken from an earlier UAS EMA study. And we have the International Physical Activity Questionnaire, or the IPAC, which is pretty standard in panel studies. And we fielded all of these to UAS participants over 3 waves starting in September of 2024. So in each wave, UAS participants in this survey received a different measure of self-reported physical activity, different questions to answer. So I'll just kind of give you an idea of the measures here. The Stanford Activity Survey asks participants if they worked in the past year, and then it asks how active they were in their work time. And it kind of gives like 4 descriptions of what a typical workday might be, ranging from most of you, right? You're sitting at your computer for the vast majority of the day, versus someone who might work in like a warehouse setting where they're on their feet and walking around for a majority of the day. And then it does the same thing for their free or leisure time activity. And in addition to that, we have another item attached to it that just asks them to assess their overall activity on a 1 to 10 scale. So the active sedentary survey, again, was taken from a UAS EMA study, just asks how active they were in the last 7 days on a 1 to 5 scale and how sedentary they were in the last 7 days on a 1 to 5 scale. And then it asks if they made any comparisons in order to arrive at that judgment. And then if they did, it asked them like if they compared themselves to a version of themselves earlier in the year, or if it compared themselves to someone they know, trying to get at how they're arriving at that. And then the IPAC, some of you might be familiar with, it asks about vigorous, moderate, and walking activity in the last 7 days. If they say that they did do this activity for at least one of the last 7 days, then they get an additional question about how much time they actually spent doing that activity on one of those days that they did that activity. So these are the 3 measures we're comparing. So for the sample, we invited over 4,000 UAS panel members to this survey who had also earlier been invited to ALIR, the American Life in Real Time study. Again, if you were at the data workshop, you might be familiar with that. In this survey, we have 703 individuals who also had a device linked with ALIR in 2024. Now, there are over 1,000 individuals who have devices in ALIR, so this isn't like the response rate to ALIR, but for this particular survey, There were some transitions and a server migration. So we have in this survey 703 individuals who had a device linked. The survey response rate for each wave was about 80%, and 99% of Alere participants answered at least one wave of the survey. So with the data we have from the wearables in Alere, we have daily averages that I calculated for both their entire annual period, so for all of 2024, as well as the week prior to the survey. Because as you might have noticed, some of those measures ask about the last 7 days. Some of those measures have an indeterminate time period and just ask how active you are. So we want to take a look at both of those. For outcomes, we have distance, steps, and what Fitbit refers to as like activity zones. These basically correspond to like moderate and vigorous and peak physical activity. So fat burn essentially is 50 to 70% of heart rate. So they call that fat burn, basically means moderate physical activity. Cardio corresponds to vigorous physical activity, and peak is minutes of peak heart rate. The compliance days is the days of total heart rate data over the total number of days they have in the study for 2024. That's 63%. Now, not all of this is like non-compliance. Sometimes there are sensor issues where I still get the steps and I still get the distance data, but I don't get the heart rate data because something's up with the sensor. But it just means that we don't have the activity zones for that portion of the sample. So for the analysis here, this is really just a first kind of cut at the data, and I just do simple linear regressions of the Alere outcomes on the standardized survey measures to try and get at how one standardized increase in the measure corresponds to increases in activity zone steps and distance. I'll go through the distributions here because we don't need them. I do want to point out some differences in the demographics, though, between Alere participants and non-Alere participants in the survey, because we also have folks in the survey who aren't in Alere. Race, the breakdown is very similar. We do have some differences in gender, and that more women are in our Alere participants. We also have different age skews between Alere participants and non-Alere participants, where those in Alere tend to be younger than participants in the survey who weren't in Alere. Education looks very similar, although Alere participants are slightly more educated, and then they have slightly higher incomes than our non-Alere survey participants. So that is a kind of caveat to these results, is that these samples aren't exactly the same, right? Okay, so just looking at the first total active minutes, which combines all of the active minute zones. The good news is that all the measures are related to activity minutes, so they are all measuring something. The bad news for settling on one is that they're not very different from one another. So pretty much a standard deviation in any of these measures looks the same as the others. So you don't have a lot of differences between the measures. And this is for total activity, and it remains true if you look at moderate physical activity, remains true if you look at vigorous physical activity. There's really not a whole lot of difference in any of these self-reported measures in terms of how they relate to actual physical activity. The same occurs with steps, and the same occurs with distance. Now, what I do in these graphs is this is looking at their past week, their past daily average of physical activity. But what we also did, again, is look at annual, their daily average for the last entire year in the study. And here, some differences do start to emerge. So the IPAC measures, which are the last three at the bottom, tend to have less of a relationship with their average daily physical activity when you look at looking back on the total year. Now, part of this might be precisely because IPAC asks them about the last 7 days. So it's not sort of getting at how they view their general physical activity, although our second treatment also asks about the last 7 days and has a stronger relationship with actual physical activity. This remains true of moderate physical activity, and it even remains true of vigorous physical activity, where our and treatment 2, our measure of physical activity, has a stronger relationship with vigorous physical activity, even though the IPAC measure is specifically asking about vigorous physical activity, and they're actually asking about the same time period as well, the past 7 days. All right, I have to finish up here. But to conclude here, the self-reports of physical activity, the good news is that they do seem to be related to actual physical activity measures from wearables. And the differences between the measures are not large. However, they do start to emerge when you start looking at the annual data. So basically, when you start looking at people's, not the past physical activity in the week, but when you start taking into account their physical activity over a long period of time. The relationship with activity is still modest. So depending on what measure you're using, the correlations range from about 0.23 to 0.34, which is consistent with what other studies have seen. And a few caveats. Again, there are different samples. We haven't added controls to the analysis, and our future plans will do that. And we also want to look at subgroup differences and perhaps difference in the correlation between actual physical activity and self-reported physical activity amongst different groups. And we want to relate both of these measures, the self-reported and the wearable measures, to health outcomes, as well as a way to kind of get at what measure we want to implement in the panel. All right, thank you very much. And special thanks to all these people without whom this project really wouldn't have been possible.